I don't know if he heard us. Ryan, were you able to take us live on YouTube? Okay. Okay, thanks so much. All right, welcome to the November 23rd Finance Committee meeting. We do have a full agenda for tonight, so we're going to jump right into it. First quick is a legislative update. It's been a busy few weeks. I know I've filled up your inboxes on substitute House Bill 305 and Senate Bill 376. We were at the State House for the last 2 Tuesdays and Wednesdays, providing testimonies to both the House Finance and Senate Finance committees. And so things are going well, gaining momentum. And the big push right now is in the Ohio Senate. We have, as you know, 15 sponsors signed on in the Senate, overwhelming majority in the House. So we're very confident that it'll move out of the House. So we are asking and targeting those school districts around the state of Ohio by region, and those senators who are either not signed on or have additional questions. And I know I've forwarded on a list following our last board meeting to any of you. And so I've got a targeted list, so to speak, of those individuals who we can reach out to and their school district superintendents and treasurers so we can get this over the finish line. So that's the Fair School Funding Plan. And then unfortunately, under some secrecy, Senate Bill 89 emerged and was passed without debate, without public input, and really misleading the public that the General Assembly, specifically those bill sponsors, had accomplished a task that was for the benefit of all Ohio public schools by saying, now that we took action on Senate Bill 89, we're going to remove hundreds of school districts from the voucher expansion list. And so a couple highlights on that, and I know that OSBA, BASA, and OASBO have all issued call to actions directly to the governor, because it is emerged from conference committee and it's likely going to be signed into law, that there are now going to be 469 buildings. There's a spreadsheet that if you haven't seen that, I've attached it here in the agenda. We have some new buildings attached to it. And the plan would also increase from the 200% poverty threshold to 250%. But the most troubling part of this really has to do with the 20% rule. So the 20% rule is the bottom 20% performance index of all school buildings in the state of Ohio, 17 with school district years 2017 and 18 and 2018-19 is really something, when you get down to the details of it, that is very targeted to urban centers. And that's something that we will educate each other on, talk about the financial impact on, and we may want to explore the Ohio Coalition of Equity and Adequacy's lawsuit in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to be getting some additional detail from that group, the number of districts, and probably at the next Finance Committee meeting or before the end of the year, I will give you an update on that. So stay tuned for Senate Bill 89 becoming law here shortly. All right.
Hey,
yes,
hey,
sir.
So let me just ask a couple of clarifying questions. And I may not have heard you correctly, but I thought you said that Senate Bill 89 was going to remove hundreds of schools from the voucher list. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, remember the argument that happened between the House and the Senate last year. I can't remember the actual legislation, but because it went into a February to April deadline and they paused on the deadline, that law exploded the list of eligible buildings to something over, 1,200 buildings, I think, Ellen and David. And they used that as a positive talking point to Senate Bill 89, saying, see, we saved this many buildings from now being part of the Ed Choice eligible school buildings.
Right. But it's still more than, but you're saying it's still way more than it was before.
It's still increasing, and they're with this bottom 20% of the performance index buildings, they're really locking in the urbans. So they've removed a lot of the other components, and yeah, that's going to be problematic.
So what's that translate to, Ryan, as far as, you know, I mean, how many, so for example, take King, right? So for example, King under the old rules was not a voucher eligible school, as I recall, but it became one under, I'm sorry, but it would have been included in that new 1,200 list. Now with the rolling back 1,200, is a school like King still on that list, or would King, I guess my question is, you know, what's the practical impact to our district as far as number of buildings?
Let me see if I can't present.
And Ryan, you know, my apologies. If you have a spreadsheet that kind of lists this out, I'm happy just to refer back to that. You don't have to pull it up. I mean, I know we've got a lot to get through tonight.
Yeah, Dr. Hall, it's embedded in the agenda.
Okay.
So you're in the administrative log on portion of it. And I don't know, can you all see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay. So these are all of the eligible buildings here that I'm highlighting. And then you can see one of the columns 3 over from the list of the buildings says designated under current law. So you can see the increase of that. And the one school building that it picked up over the previous year was Firestone. King is not on there.
Okay. So is this, so this is not showing what it would be under Senate Bill 89 though?
This is Senate Bill 89, correct. I'm sorry, this is Senate Bill 89, the eligible list of buildings under what just emerged from conference committee.
So even though it's not a law yet, someone's already prepared a list of what schools will be included in there.
That all happened within 48 hours. The conference committee was called, negotiated, the Legislative Service Commission prepared this list, and press releases were all done within 48 hours.
So not to ask you an overly complicated question, I guess I can do math too. But you know, where was our starting point? So prior to the old rule that sort of increased the number of 12 to 1,200 buildings, what were we? How many buildings of ours qualified for Ed Choice prior to that 1,200 list coming out? Do you know, just ballpark? Was it like
Ellen, David, correct me if I'm wrong, we were approaching 27 or so. Is that about right? And
that's correct. Mm-hmm.
About 27, we picked up another 1 or 2 buildings. Is that correct?
Yes.
And with the income threshold, I do have a financial analysis. You know, when we did the Ohio School Board's presentation, I included some of that. So
your point then, we were at 27 as a baseline. With the 1,200 list, we added a couple schools, and now with Senate Bill 89, are we? You know, did we drop any schools from the list with Senate Bill 89, or is it okay?
No, we've added.
So no impact to us.
Only that it limits the rubric for who qualifies. So now it's just the bottom 20 percentile performance index buildings in the state of Ohio. And the only other requirement is the percent of poverty, 250% of poverty. And so I do expect the number of students to submit for that voucher to go up. And so the next question is, Dr. Hall, is the financial impact of which, now that this thing's out of committee and likely to become law, that'll be the next impact that we do for finance committee in the month of December or before the first of the year. Because I want to give you an impact as it relates to the 5-year forecast, because few years ago, we were looking at $4 million. And with all vouchers and choice and Peterson and autism, we're at $11 million and change now. It will continue to increase.
So Ryan, how does that contrast then with, I know that we had talked earlier about, they've kind of frozen, sort of the number of students attributed to us, was frozen for what, last year and this year. When do they next revisit that number? Because to your point, even if more students applied for it, what I guess our state funding wouldn't be different, right?
Yeah, I don't know that answer. I'll have to do a little research on that one. You're talking about as far as the historic look back on the grade card qualifications that was in.
Yeah.
I don't believe that is part of Senate Bill 89. I believe that the only two qualifying components is the percent of poverty and the bottom 20% of poverty, or bottom 20% of performance index.
Okay.
That's it. No more look back for the grade card and picking years when it was all changing.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll have we'll have a deeper dive on the voucher impact in the future. Yes,
Gotcha.
Ms. Autry.
Yeah, so just a clarifying question. So from what I can tell on this list, actually there's just one school in our district that will be added to this list. Is that accurate? And that would be Firestone.
That's correct.
All the other schools have been on this list.
They have been on this list. That's correct.
I have a quick question. Can you tell me what the income is that's 250% above the poverty threshold, please?
Sure.
That's usually a family of four, Ryan, as I recall, right? That family of four, that threshold is based off family of four?
Yes. I'm looking it up right now. It's $64,375. That's the 2020 250% of federal poverty level. So it's $64,375.
Thank you.
4,375. All right, so there's a couple attachments there in your board docs. If you have any additional questions, I may even do a little bit more of an update Monday night on it, or it will be at the next board meeting because I know we have a lot going on with the 5-year forecast. Any other questions on that part? Seeing none, let's move into 2.02 district-wide financial information, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McWilliams-Woods for the middle school budget review for college and career academies.
Thank you, Ryan. I will take over my screen here. All right. So I wanted to, I have Mrs. Tecca is also here in the meetings in case we have more specific strategy questions. But I just want to start by just doing a 2-minute, literally maybe a minute and a half review of the major concepts that are being funded in this. So from our special board meeting, we talked about those 3 big buckets that this is K-12, college and career academy transformation. So there's strategies around teaching and learning. There's the school experience, which is more the climate, social emotional work, and then the business and civic engagement. These are the 2 primary areas, the teaching and learning and the climate pieces are kind of broken down even further under these 3 buckets. So the budget was built. What happened is all the tactical teams identified and costed out everything that's in those tactical plans that you have in the master plan. each tactical plan submitted budget items to fund everything that they listed in their plan. And that's how we pulled together this 5-year budget. So it addresses all of these areas. The detail, if you want to see what's being funded, that's all in the tactical plans that are part of the master plan. There's also the component of the family engagement structures that we talked about at the special board meeting. So this is that third bucket of that community and family engagement. So there's funding supporting these types of strategies as well that are all outlined more in detail in the tactical plans. So then if you remember, we looked at this whole 5-year, how we're going to space it out. We did move some things into subsequent years compared to what the original tactical plans asked for, just because of this COVID year from last spring till now. We did shift a few things later. There's not that much cost at all in 24-25, because all of that is pretty much more into sustaining strategies. So there's no new costs in 24-25 that you'll see when we take a look at the budget. So the assumptions that we used as we built the budget with all the co-chairs of the tactical teams. Number one, and this is perfect night that we're moving right into our 5-year forecast discussion tonight too, is due to the financial strain in our general fund 5-year forecast. The goal was really to protect our local taxpayer money. And over this past year to a year and a half, we've really tried to shift the costs and go out and partner with major national funders to move all of these startup costs and all the training that happens when you make this level of transformation. A lot is training, new structures and systems that you have to put in place that can be sustained for the long term. And we built the budget in that way. But there's the first few years, there's a lot of startup costs. And we tried to shift the bulk of that to private grants. Then the second assumption was repurposing our current general funds and our state and federal grants. So in the budget, you'll see a line that talks about our current budget. That's current money that we already have, for example, in our College and Career Academy department or in Karen Gijic's Teaching and Learning department. She already has professional development money in federal grants or in general fund money that already exists, that we have worked this past 8 to 9 months as we've built this budget to look at what can we stop doing, where can we shift so that we can cover the costs internally with current money and not ask the superintendent, the treasurer, and the board for new money to fund this transformation. And then the third assumption is really actively identifying reductions in current district expenditures. Whenever you reallocate funds, part of that work is, are there things that we can stop doing to make sure that we really refocus our funding on this College and Career Academy middle school transformation now? But most importantly, where we are with our budget and our 5-year forecast that we'll be talking about tonight, we had to make sure, and we all collectively need to make sure, that after all that our students have gone through since last March and into this year, we can't shortchange our students. And so we have to find a way to move forward with our strategies and our transformation and not let the pandemic or our budget forecast right now, we can't let that get off track on the citywide transformation that we're doing.
So I'm sorry, Dr.
Yes.
Moon. I have a slide question about that last slide.
Yeah.
So and if you prefer, I can let you get through your presentation and then we can go back to it. It's
no, that's fine. You go right ahead.
Okay. So for example, so to me, this slide is loaded, right? So when we're saying repurposing current general funds, I mean, I guess what I want to understand is the funds that are being repurposed, for, so what then are we going to do with those funds that are being repurposed? Right. That's one question. And also,
Yeah.
I know with state and federal grants, oftentimes there are strings attached, if you will, to how those monies get spent. So I just want to, I want to understand sort of, are the rules transferable in this instance? So are we saying that those grants, that what we're doing with the middle school transformation, we're saying that, that those grants will be satisfied by the activities that we're going to engage in around middle school transformation? That's question 2. And then question 3 is, when we start talking about actively identifying reductions in current district expenditures, when I look at the budgets that are on the attachment that we're going to walk through, I guess I'm trying to figure out, it seems like we've already identified those reductions. And I just want to understand, well, what did we identify, and what are we reducing, to fund this? So that's why this slide to me was, these assumptions are loaded for me. So that's why
Sure.
my head kind of blew up a bit. I'm like, okay, I got to unpack that. So you can answer that later, but those are just some questions that I've got. So
Well, I can give you examples. For example, in that second bullet, when we repurpose current general funds and state and federal grants. For example, Karen Gijic has a pot of money, both general fund and federal funds, to support professional development. So we've been very heavily investing that professional development in digital literacy skills of our staff, building, everything that we did once we went to one-to-one, we did a lot of training on one-to-one over the past 4 years, really. But we're at a place where we don't need to allocate the same amount of money for all that digital literacy. We still need to provide that support, but we don't need to allocate as much money to train for digital literacy, because everyone's skills are at such a higher level than they were 4 years ago. We
Sure.
can shift some of that funds now into the inquiry-based learning, the social emotional learning standards, the pieces that are in that master plan. Everything that's in that master plan, especially in the technical plans at the end that we gave you that outline specific strategies, that's now where we're going to shift current funds and say, where could we take the money that we've expended and move it over here to fund this, rather than asking for new money and at the same time expecting our teachers to take double the amount of professional development. That's an impossible task. So that's the example of repurposing.
Yeah. So,
We
yeah. So to that point, I mean, I think that's a good example of what I was going for, because I guess I'm trying to understand, as you get from master plan to tactical plan to this slide deck to the actual forecast. For me, I guess what would be helpful is, for lack of a better term, a crosswalk, if you will, where we can see, okay, this budget line item, X dollars from here ended up going over here. Line item Z, we took $48,000 from here and we moved it over to here, to fund this. So that's where I know we don't have that today, but that's where,
Right.
but what you gave was a great example of what I'm trying to wrap my head around, and then thinking about how that connects back to the master plan / tactical plan. And so and if I need to do more homework on this, that's fine. I'm happy to do that, but I just need your help kind of connecting the numbers that are here back to that master plan and tactical plan. Does that make sense?
Sure. And we won't be able to give you that fine grain of exactly this line item. We took, $6,000 to move it over here, because but we can show you buckets of money and buckets of strategies that a little bit more, a little grouped funds. Because what we do is we turn to Karen Gijic and say, look, the tactical team members want to do X, Y, and Z in terms of professional development. You go back and tell me that you can find these funds. And she may be pulling from multiple budgets, but it's not as precise. She's never had to turn to me in a budget that says I took 2,000 from here and 4,000 from here, because this is a 5-year projection. She has to be able to show to me total for her general fund monies that she can allocate this money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So I think that's a fair compromise.
Yeah.
Again, because I'm obviously I'm very inquisitive, and so again, I don't want to be sort of in the grass on this, but I'll confess I don't have a good enough understanding yet of how the numbers connect back to the master and tactical plan. So for me, those buckets that you
Sure.
talked about, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, no problem. So just the last slide before we actually look at that budget summary is, why this is so important is in this context of our 5-year forecast, where we're going to be looking at some deficit budgets over the next 5 years. And then I'm asking you in the same meeting to also look at this 5-year budget for our middle school transformation and to support that, because we've got to keep this work moving forward. We have to continue to raise those achievement levels. We have to keep that innovation for college and career academies on track with our high quality teachers and courses, and all of that wraparound that you saw in the master plan, that social emotional learning, the family wraparound supports, so that we can keep developing this workforce that we are really have kind of taken that central role in the city. So that's why this is so important.
So question here too. If you just go back a
Mhm.
slide. So we're talking about you see, so you have in there, and you have it in bold. You've got keep on track with high quality teachers.
Yep.
How are we defining a high quality teacher?
We've got, and when we have our Ohio teacher evaluation system that helps define that across the different 5 different standards that they get evaluated on. All of that defines the high quality teachers, and then and high quality courses that we have to meet all the state standards for the courses that we provide.
So I guess what I'm asking is because I know when you contrast, say, Bookdale versus Elliott, for example, I've got average tenure at Bookdale at 7 years. Average tenure of Elliott at 17 years, and so we make the assumption that that if you're a more tenured teacher, that you're a higher quality teacher. Tends to be the way. Tends to be the thinking, right? I mean, there are certainly exceptions to the rule, but when I look at Bookdale and I say, oh, okay, well, based upon sort of that sort of limited example, I would argue that my highest quality teachers are probably going to be at Elliott, right? So how then? And this is a question that we can kind of table for another day too. But I just want to get it out there, and also the way that we pay is predicated upon seniority, and we're saying, well, because you're more experienced, you should be a higher quality teacher, which then justifies the increased salary. So to me, I'm thinking about from an equity issue, how then am I ensuring that I've got an equal representation of quality teachers across all of these buildings, right? Where we're going to be offering, this academy at the middle school level, and you could apply the same thing to high school as well. So again, I'm not trying to drop a bomb on what you're talking about, but that's when I saw the high quality thing. That was where my head kind of instantly went to.
Right. I mean, those are all the metrics that we take a look at. The one thing you have to remember, though, you can't compare Bookdale with other high schools on that metric, because Bookdale is an interview only school. So all the other schools are transfer schools where that's based on seniority, and the teachers end up wherever they are based on our contract. Bookdale, the staff there select who comes into Bookdale. So if that's where that's a apples to oranges comparison. Same thing at STEM, and same thing at early college. Those are interview schools, so they're selecting who they have and what they have. That's not based on how all of the other teachers are placed based on seniority. So that's a whole nother fabulous conversation for us to have.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair, but I think what makes me sad about that example is that if it's an interview school and they're selecting, they get to select, and the best they had to choose from, are teachers with significantly less tenure than other schools, then to me that's an equity issue. That's a problem, and not the one that we're going to say that we're going to solve today on this call.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're right. This is an offline conversation, but I just but this is where my
Right.
head is at. And Ryan, as we're talking about the equity and the finance piece, and we're drilling down to the individual school level, this is why we're having this conversation, right? Because we have to start to move the ball in that direction where we're looking at this, because there are, you know, Ryan knows this. I'm doing a certificate in educational finance at Georgetown University right now. I got a cohort of 200 people from across the country. These are superintendents, you know, high-ranking people across the country in education. And so there are a number of districts that, you know, where, and this is something that we can get to, but there are numbers where basically, like, you know, high-quality teachers, you know, are being assigned to lower performing schools. And there are salary adjustments, you know, to help make that more palatable, like DC does this. You know, so that's why I'm saying, like, you know, with these academies, as they're moving this forward, that's something that we're going to have to address, you know. But anyway, I'm sorry to get off the beaten path, but you know.
That would be a great topic, because we were part of a statewide project all on that topic. And we had financial incentives for teachers to go to lower performing schools, so that we can look back at that research along with some of the other Ohio 8 districts that worked on that project. Okay, so the actual budget, I have two different views of the budget. And probably the most important, I'm just going to click out of the presentation because I already have them up. So the two different lenses is one that just shows the new costs year to year. So once it's in the budget and it's sustained in a budget, for this lens, this just shows year to year what is new, what are the new expenses in subsequent years. And then the other budget that I sent you is the annual total budget, all expenses for all of these new strategies and initiatives. So it continues the recurring year to year. So probably the most important for all of you is the 5-year forecast kind of lens that shows what's new costs year to year. And so we have the revenue. Can you see this size-wise okay? And I know you all have it. I'll try to blow it up a little bit for you.
Yeah. Hey, Ellen, you know, just for me, you guys, these were in the attachment, so I've got to open it on another screen. So I'm actually looking at this as a side-by-side, but I'm
okay, great. Great. Okay. So the first line shows the grants and corporate gifts then, which includes all of the, the GAR funding, the Hewlett funding that we'll be able to find out this week to announce that. The Chan Zuckerberg and the superintendent has talked about these grants with you, and we shared that with you at the special board meeting about the two major grants that we've applied for that will all come together this week. So we'll know this before the meeting of the 30th. And then the Martha Holden Jennings grant has been a grant that we've received that's really hones in on the middle school funding. All of that is in this line item, row 6, that over the 5 years, it totals about $2.5 million in revenue from these different funding sources. And Akron Community Foundation is in there as well. Then we have the general fund split into two categories. Current general fund is exactly, Dr. Hall, what we were just talking about, where it's not new money that we're needing for this, it's that we're reallocating our current general fund to cover the costs in the technical plans. And so that turns out to be about $600,000 of reallocating, and with a heavier lift in 21-22. And then there's a line item for new general fund, which is about $564,000, and then using some federal funds, particularly this year, as startup funds. And this is, again, whenever we look at this is planned for 5 years, but obviously, we can we can end up having enrollment shifts with our teaching core that free up some teachers that we could reallocate and not have to use any new general fund money, for example. So it's always, this is a 5-year, but it certainly year to year, we make adjustments every single year. The more we get additional grant funds, we'll plug it right into here, always under those assumptions that I went over, that we try as much as we can to relieve the general fund of these costs when we're going through this type of transformation. You can see the heavy lift is at the, the first 2 years is where new money, coming in. And that's true. That was the same for our high school transformation. It always takes more money those first 2 years to get everything started up. The types of things that are in this 21-22 budget, that if you saw in our 5-year plan, and you'll see it in our tactical plans, things like finishing the makerspace complete redesigns in our middle schools and our libraries. Each one of those, can cost up to like $100,000 to $150,000, depending on all of the equipment we purchase. So trying to finish that in these first 2 years. Some of the teacher cost is potential unless we can reallocate teachers, which oftentimes we can. But in that second year, 21-22, the biggest cost is having an academy coach at every single middle school, similar to what we have in the high school. And that person is the point of contact for the nonprofits, so that they have one person who's arranging all the problem-based learning experiences out in the community, arranging the transportation, going out and co-designing what those problem-based learning units and service learning projects will be. That's one person per middle school. Now, we have the full faith that we will be able to reallocate positions. We've already found 2 positions in the district that we're going to close for next year, so that we can move those over to the academy coach. We did the same thing for the high school. We had to hire an academy coach for every single high school. By the year we did it, we had closed other positions and reallocated them so that we didn't have any new cost for the general fund. And so those are the types of things that kind of under the hood, just like every organization, you identify your priorities and you look at ways to make sure that we're maximizing the current funds that we have to support this transformation.
Hey, so Dr. Williams, I actually have a
Mhm.
few questions about that. So when you said that, so first off, going back to sort of the grants and corporate gifts funding.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, in the forecast here, that again, you enlisted that sort of the grant, the grantors. So so you're making the assumption that we're getting all those grants. Is that right?
I am. I
So
have them just so you can see them
right.
visually here. These 2 are listed as pending,
Mhm.
but we have basically been, both of those organizations have been working with us as if giving us every single signal that these are going to be granted. So yes, the assumption is in there, and in the, we put the money in here,
Yeah.
knowing that just based on the level of confidence that they have given to us, and we knew we would know this week before we go to the board on Monday, so that if it doesn't happen, we can adjust the budget by Monday, but we'll know this week, so that we'll be able to announce that.
So let me ask a more sort of a nuts and bolts question. Like, wouldn't it have made, I guess I'm asking, like, and I don't mean to sound critical here, but would it not have made more sense to wait until you had a decision on this before this committee met and discussed it? Because I feel like that this committee's, I mean, the purpose is, is for it to come to this committee first, this committee kind of gives its blessing, again, goes to the board, and then Diane and I, Ms. Autry and I say, hey, we've seen this budget. We're recommending to the rest of you that we move forward with it, right?
Sure.
So that's why I'm just asking, like, more for and I get to your point. You're pretty certain we're gonna get get these dollars.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like, from a process standpoint, it seems like I would rather wait till we had the dollars in, and because to your point, if we don't get this, and this changes between this committee meeting and the board meeting on Monday, where Ms. Autry and I ostensibly would be making a recommendation, to the rest of the board, right? Saying, hey, listen, like,
Right.
or at least voicing our support for it, right?
Sure. We would never surprise you on Monday with the news one way or the other. We would never put it in here unless we were unbelievably confident that we are going to receive, based on every call, and the superintendent can weigh in here, that we wouldn't have put it in here, because normally we don't when we have other grants that we've just submitted. But we are so confident in the timing of this, knowing that we're going to know, today or tomorrow, that we wanted to make sure that we put it in.
Gotcha. Dr. James?
Stay tuned to the instructional policy meeting tomorrow.
Okay, I'll make sure I'm on that one as well. And that's the thing. And that's the thing that's complicated about this, right? I mean, like, I feel like on this particular topic, I guess I'm asking, would it have made more sense to have a joint committee meeting where it's finance and instructional policy? That way we're looking at the finance as well as the curriculum stuff kind of side by side. Because I know I'm going to ask you questions that are probably better suited for tomorrow's meeting, but tomorrow's meeting, I'm not going to have these numbers up in front of me, right? I mean, so that's in this instance, I guess my ask is, as we're working through college and career academy stuff in the future,
Sure.
I guess I'm asking that we consider combining those committees for this particular topic, since there is a finance and kind of a programmatic component to it.
Sure. That, we can, if you want to sit down and go through this in more detail, obviously you always know that I'd be happy to do that. The emphasis, I think, is what we do is we translate what's in that master plan and the strategies that are there, and we just translate it right into a budget. So the strategies you already have, that's what we went over at the special board meeting. You have all the tactical plans. All this is if we fund everything that's in there in this master plan, this is what it looks like. And this is just the plan, obviously. Everything we want to actually then fund, we have to bring to you. Those academy coaches, you have to approve them separately. When we do AVID, which is the program to support kids in higher level courses, that contract has to come to you. So you're not approving the content of the budget. You're approving just you're approving the strategies in the master plan to say, this is the roadmap, but then everything we want to actually fund, you're going to have to approve separately, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. But I'm wanting to bet, though, that the master plan has probably been talked about in a lot more detail in the instructional and policy, the instructional curriculum committee, right?
Sure. We've been talking about it for a year. Right.
Right. So that's where I feel bad, because I feel like I'm asking you questions that you're like, well, hey, if you were a member of this other committee, you would know all this stuff already. So, again, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to make sure that the finance committee, Ms. Autry and myself, are informed about what it is we're looking at. And that's the joy of this distributed leadership, where you have to have the brilliance of Mrs. McKittrick and Mrs. Mansfield, working through the transformation plan, that trust that they've been paying attention to that, and then you on the other side with all of the finances for the district. So it's a tough thing, though. Yeah. So my second question was going to be, you mentioned the reallocation. So for example, what the reallocated of general funds, I guess I was confused as to why we would be reallocating, because if we knew that we were going to be doing this, we didn't have a budget for these dollars. I mean, so we're having to reallocate. I guess I don't follow, mechanistically speaking. Why are we having to reallocate anything? from the general fund? I guess I don't follow that.
Because we do that every single year. That's not, I mean, just at SUMA, for example, you're not spending the same money on the same things every single year. You've got, here's the next set of strategies that we're going to do, and you retool your budget to support that. Otherwise, we would be seeking new money, which we don't have all the time, right? Constantly. Now, we've been lucky to have the grants to support that, not just the new ones we're talking about, but our current partnerships with GAR and Akron Community Foundation and Martha Holden Jennings that really helps support our general fund. But every year, we always are retooling, reallocating, shifting based on our priorities and kind of the next stage of priorities. So I don't see this as something unusual. I think this is a positive strategy that we're maximizing the funds we have and not just getting locked into, we're going to pay for this forever and ever. Even if it's a bad strategy, we're just going to keep paying for it and not reallocating to support our new transformational work. And there's also things that only need funding for a few years. We've had quite a few literacy and math training that is, around our curriculum adoptions. As soon as that happens, we don't have to do that forever. We can now reallocate, now that we've been through a math adoption, we can start reallocating those funds to the social emotional learning work and some of the diversity training and things like that.
Yeah, I follow that. I'm just saying that typically, though, to your point, if I'm really reallocating funds or allocating additional funds, it's because I may have already had an initiative the prior year, but now I'm finding out I need more FTEs. The cost of supplies went up, so now I need to reallocate more money, right? Or we apply for more grants and then apply. So that's why I was asking,
right,
a year ago, what do we budget here? I guess it would be my question, right? And how does it differ from what I'm looking at here, right? I mean,
with our high school, college, and career academies, the positive thing that happened with that is there were two major costs in that, which was what I already talked about with the academy coaches. And then there were some, because we were splitting staff into teams, into academies, there were some increased cost of the number of staff. But as we went through that 5 years, just because we were able to reallocate funds, we got additional grant funds that helped support that whole total 5-year budget. We really did much better and didn't lean as heavily on the general fund as we thought we were going to. So again, this is a kind of a path forward, but it can absolutely change year to year based on our circumstances and based on other funding that we can bring in. We don't stop seeking funding just because we've approved the master plan. That's actually when we, keep working on securing additional funding to help.
Right, gotcha. So I know we talked earlier about kind of working to kind of crosswalk the plan to the budget. So that would be super helpful for me. And then you mentioned, and this is my last question, and I'll let you go on, about you mentioned that we closed other positions to be able to open up additional academy coach positions. So were those other positions, I mean, for example, do we have fewer teachers in that school, so in order to accommodate having an academy coach? I mean, what sort of trade-offs were we making, to create these academy coach positions? And then kind of the part B of that is, from an economies of scale standpoint, would it make sense to have a centralized office as opposed to having an academy coach in each individual school? Would it make sense to have a centralized office where, rather than 6 academy coaches, I may have 2 people, and this is their full-time job, is coordinating this, sort of day in and day out? Because I know that when I've walked through a couple of different schools, those academy coaches are doing, they're kind of they're jack of all trades. I mean, they're doing all kinds of stuff, So not trying to devalue what they're doing, but I'd venture to guess that their core mission, I guess that their activities probably go beyond what their core mission actually happens to be, and I get the reasons why, because you're in a building, you're trying to be helpful, blah blah blah. But that just and also too, you know, the United Way said that they were funding one of these positions. I thought, or was it, or are they just funding their own person on their side? I guess when Jim
Yeah, they
says
have-
we're funding an FTE to support the academy model, how does that connect with this?
Yeah, what they do is and this is for the high school, they recruit and do the initial kind of match and onboarding of businesses to partner with our academies. So they go out and they meet with all of the businesses. They find new contacts for us. They talk to them about what their goals are. Then they bring the business partners around to our schools to look at the different options and the different pathways that we have. And then when it looks like the business is saying, yes, I'd like to partner with East Welding, then the handoff then comes to our coordinator over partner engagement and the academy coach at that building. So they do the initial, we call them the partner broker. And then they work with that business partner through the year to check in, to make sure things are going well, and to see where they need to go like the next year, and whether they want to continue in the same level or whether they want to deepen the relationship. So that's what United Way does. So they start them and then hand them off. The Akron Community Foundation is going to fund a full-time person at the Akron Community Foundation to be able to do the same thing as that partner broker role for the middle school transformation. So there's 600 some nonprofits in this community. And so that partner broker will work with those nonprofits to do the same thing, match them with our middle schools, and then do the handoff to our academy coaches at each school. The academy coaches are absolutely critical to this work. The communities that have made the biggest transformation, especially with that level of engagement, have a dedicated person. And that's the one thing, and Mrs. Tecca can, be my witness. Everywhere we went, everyone said, you have to have a full-time person with each school talking to those partners, because otherwise it gets chaotic, it gets overwhelming. And the academy coach is also responsible for helping lead the whole transformation of the instruction too, the inquiry-based learning and doing those projects. It's not just the partner, it's also the instructional part within the classroom too. So that's sort of, to me, that's kind of, that has always been a non-negotiable for us, and it has been hugely impactful for the high school. That was one of the first things the master planning team said, we have to replicate that at the middle school level as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the other view, just so you understand the difference between this one that is all the new costs, then the second budget that I sent you has the full cost. So this is where it's not just, this is every single year. If we're paying for those 6 academy coaches, that money is in this salary line item year to year to year to year. So it's showing every single year, it's showing your total cost for doing this middle school transformation. We always look at the budget both ways. What's the total program cost to do this transformation every single year? And then what is just that 5-year forecast, which means what's the new money that gets infused each year? And that's the first one that we looked at. And that is all I have.
Hey, Ellen. So yeah, I have a question about that. So, for example, take 2021, 22, right?
Yes.
Under expenses. So I've got the forecast, which is showing 1.148 million in 21, 22 salaries and fringe benefits, and then annual total costs for 2022 is 1.5 million. So what that makes me think is that the last year's budget, that number would have been $400,000, and so now what we're showing 1.1 million dollars in new costs for 2021, 22. Is that the correct interpretation of that?
I didn't follow you. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So for example, because I've got these up on a side by side.
Oh,
the lovely
okay.
thing about having a home office, right? You have multiple screens, you can put things side by side on. So
Yes.
I'm looking at the forecast first, and the forecast is showing under salaries and fringe. And by the way, I'm just using this as an example, so to make sure I'm understanding what's being presented.
Yeah.
But I'm showing $1.148 million, right, for
Right.
salaries and fringe benefits for the forecast for 2021-22. There we go. Yep, you're there. And then if you look at the same line item for annual total cost, which to your point, that spreadsheet is reflective of all costs, annual total costs. That's 1.5. So I'm just doing the math in my head. I'm saying, all right, well, so my original number there from a budget standpoint a year ago, that number would have been $400,000 approximately. So because again, we're saying we have 1.1 million in new costs. So for me, that's the disconnect I'm talking about, right? So what is included in the additional costs that we didn't budget for a year ago? So we're talking about $1.1 million in new costs. Where are those dollars being spent, and why did we not budget for it a year ago? Like what changed between last year and this year that we have $1.1 million in new costs and salaries and benefits? And you might say, well, hey, we're adding more, each school there needs an academy coach. Well, to your point, if we knew that a year ago, like why would that not have been in the budget or a year ago? Or you saying we didn't have the money a year ago to do it? That's, I guess, my question.
No, we didn't have the expense a year ago. Like we didn't
We didn't have the master plan. A year ago, that group had just got started to develop it, and they just completed their work.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Which included, our staff and our community partners.
Gotcha. So for example, like a year ago, that number would have been 400,000 in the budget for 2020, 2021, 22. What would that money have been spent on? Just like the folks who are working on the plan? Because I mean, that's a pretty big jump, right? I mean, as far as a new cost, that's why I kind of use that example trying to understand, well, what's being included in that $1.1 million? Is that 4 academy coaches? I mean, like what's
six academy coaches are in that budget, that 1.148.
Okay.
So that's the year that it hits. Now, and we're not hiring them until that 21-22. We'll identify them this spring, and then they'll be in the budget. Then that cost will hit in 21-22. Our goal is that we can make sure that we don't actually that we reallocate by then some other positions, so we won't have that cost. But we go ahead and put it all in there, kind of the worst case scenario that we have to make sure it's there. We have 6th grade teachers in that budget because we have a new 6th grade course in this budget, and that's all in the tactical plans. There's a whole strategy around starting a new 6th grade college and career academy course. So when we budget that out, we say, okay, to have a new 6th grade college and career academy course, we can't use federal dollars from CTE, career technical education, because that only goes down to 7th grade. So that potentially is a new cost that we better put here in 21-22, because that's when we're going to start this new 6th grade course. In the meantime, we may be able to not have another course or not have some intervention and be able to reallocate a teacher. That always happens every year. We're reallocating teachers based on enrollment, based on how many kids sign up for courses, et cetera. So that may dissolve, but right now, when we do a plan, we still have to put it here. That's why eventually it'll come to you then for approval once we get to the actual items. But right now we put in that it will be, another cost of one teacher for a 6th grade elective in 21-22.
Yeah. So I see that we're at 5:30. I know that we're at time or nearly so. So just a couple of kind of thoughts I have.
Sure.
I don't know if you got through everything. I mean, again, I could hang on for a little bit longer.
That's everything I had.
So a couple of thoughts. One would be, to just look at numbers, from our side, it doesn't tell the story, right? I mean, the instructional policy, that's the storytelling is happening there. And so we're not hearing that story in finance, which is why you're getting all the questions you're getting from me. So and this is so for me, like, it might be helpful, at least on the topic of college and career academies as we move forward, to do some joint meetings with you guys.
Sure.
So that way you're not spending 45 minutes in a meeting answering questions that have already been asked and answered in another committee meeting, right? I mean, so that's one thing. Number two, these are public meetings, right? So the one thing I just would make sure that I'm being very clear about is the questions I'm asking I'm not asking those questions because of a lack of faith in our senior teams here. This is me as a new board member trying to be an informed board member. So all of us as board members are wholeheartedly supportive of this transformation project. So again, let's make sure that's very clear to folks who are listening on the call. You just happen to have a new board member who's trying to get up to speed and understand kind of the past, present, and kind of the future on this. So Dr. McWilliams-Woods, I appreciate the time that you've taken to put this together, and look forward to sort of moving this work forward.
I would also just throw in, I mean, if we add instructional policy too, we're looking at just having full board meetings. So it's kind of what you have now, Mr. President. We've got you, we've got Diana, we got 4 board. We already got 4 board members. I mean, that's basically a board meeting as it is. So to selectively, once every other month or once every 2 months. I mean, I'll defer to Dr. McWilliams-Woods and Rachel Ms. Tech on this, but I do think it sort of makes sense, at least on a quarterly basis, to kind of get these committees together so we can kind of have, so some cross-pollination can happen. Because I venture Ms. McKittrick and Ms. Mansfield want to understand what all this is actually going to cost too, right? And maybe you cover this in that committee as well. But again, I do think that, there's a lot of bright minds on our board, and I think some opportunities for cross-pollination are certainly in order. If you don't mind, I don't mean to be rude, but I kind of got cut off. You were actually heading where I was going to suggest, which is perhaps maybe a couple of full board working sessions might be more beneficial than splitting some of the work up. So at the risk of repeating everything you just said, you kind of stole what I was going to say. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Roger, thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll stay on for the 5-year forecast, Ryan, too, as well.
Okay, great. All right, moving on to 5-year forecast. And these 2 next sections for 2.02 5-year forecast, state of financial affairs, and ultimately the equity and transparency and spending unit level analysis will all kind of blend together. But the story was, the storytelling part of it resonated really well, because this next section, I'll show you a few high level screens and we can detail that as much as you want to do, because the storytelling component of this is going to be the most important part leading up to Monday and the 5-year forecast. Let me bring up the May 5-year forecast. And we'll start there and kind of work into today's forecast. Does everybody see the 5-year forecast on screen? Okay, I got a high sign there. Okay.
Yep.
I'm just going to draw your attention to the center of the page. And you see my cursor here? Negative 15.5 million. So that is fiscal 21. That's the 2021 school year that we are in right now. Now, what we didn't know about a May 5-year forecast at that point in time was the global pandemic, federal stimulus dollars, some other local grants, the federal stimulus dollar pass through the county, and where that leaves us today. And this storytelling that we're going to be talking about for the next few months and throughout, I'm sure, all of next year is going to be really important. Setting the backdrop to this by far is the most disruptive financial background in forecasting that I've ever seen in my career. And so I kind of want to share with you today some of my assumptions and show you a little bit of the numbers, get your reaction to that, and then ultimately give me some marching orders for the themes that we're going to present and talk about in the Monday 5-year forecast. Different from forecasts in the past, where we set a forecast in May and November, much like what we did with our return to school committee. This is going to be a month-to-month conversation. Likely adjustments to the Department of Education with the forecast, and with the increased number of COVID cases, the realities of returning to school. And I apologize, just from an operations and finance perspective, I'm not trying to get out in front of the board for those watching today or who are going to be watching in the future. I'm not trying to get out in front of the superintendent, but those assumptions are going to have major financial implications. So the backdrop on this screen is we were at a deficit this year of about $15 million, with ending cash reserves about $43 million, with the following year violating the district's cash reserve policy, which was around $35 million. And obviously, anytime we deficit spend to those numbers, we're looking at new operating funds. And it's been about every 6 years over the last 30 years that we're asking for new monies. We've managed 8. And so let's talk about what the impact of that is now moving forward. I'm going to show you some screens here. I'll jump around, but I'll try to make it less painful. Does everybody see what's in the center of my screen now, called 5CAST, or Akron City School District? November.
Can it be magnified at all?
Yes, let me do that.
Thank you.
Ms. Autry's old.
Yes.
I tilt my head back and I don't even have glasses on here. So
Get a magnifying glass. That's what this old woman has to do.
all right, what I'm showing you, what's not on here is draft all over this, and these numbers are going to change, right? I'm going to show a couple numbers, but this is called the KISS statement, or the keep it simple statement. High level revenues, high level expenditures. That bold line in the middle compares to that minus $15 million that we were projecting last year. Again, I don't want you to pay attention to the numbers. I don't want you to look at the ending cash balance, and I don't want you looking out 5 years. I want you looking at trends only. The reason I want you to look at trends, just to garner a little sympathy for the project, not for me, is, today I spent probably 30 minutes just walking. Dr. McWilliams-Woods called me. We were working on another project, but she called me. I'm like, I just finished 30 minutes going through our electricity and forecasting that. And so I want to give you a scenario of how this is shaping out, leave you with some financial themes, and again, leave plenty of time for questions. So the themes are what you see at the top of the page in the revenue. You see that highlighted where it says revenue there? That's not going to change much, right? Remember, school district fiscal aid from the state of Ohio had an aggregate 3.5% state budget reduction over the biennium. We probably only saw about 3.5 million of that this year, which is about 1% of our annual budget. And then 2022, I've had a long conversation and healthy debate with Mr. Bravo about this as it relates to property values. 2022, we're actually seeing some good, healthy property tax revenue increases, new construction, and reappraisals, where most of those dollars are coming. So looking at my revenue estimates, I don't anticipate those are going to change much. So that line that's highlighted, very confident. Very confident, a couple points maybe in delta over that term, but very confident. The expenditure part is where we're going to spend a lot of our time in assumptions over the next few months. and leading into a financial need discussion. So let's just take it down to a really granular level, and I apologize for doing that, but I want you to see the impact of this and how subtle but how financially significant this walkthrough is. And hopefully what's being conveyed here is a level of financial transparency to the community, both at the board committee level and for their practitioners in-house, to say, yeah, this is really significant, and these are 7-figure dollars all the way through that we take really seriously. You know, this isn't just like the straight and level budget estimate. This is forecasting electricity for a district that is virtual and realigning those dollars to make sure that they support programming in the future. So does everybody see the bar chart? Hopefully you see that. I don't see you, so occasionally, so I know I'm not talking to myself. Somebody give me a high sign.
You're good. You're good,
Okay.
Brian.
Thank you. So you see the subtleties here in the electricity rates. I just wanted to, and this was what was going on today when Dr. McWilliams-Woods and I talked, is you see fiscal 18 to fiscal 19, right? You're looking 4.6 million to 4.8 million district-wide electricity, right? That's a lot of money, but let's put it in perspective to a $350 million budget. And then look what happens between 2019 and 2020, right? From May until the end of the year being the fiscal year, so June 30th. Look at the drop from 4.8 million to 2020. And then let's talk about, or let's challenge the fiscal folks here. What are we going to estimate in 2021 for all these objects, whether it's water and sewage or electricity or natural gas? What are we going to estimate? What's reasonable? And then just as important for 21 is what do you do with 2022? So that's the 21-22 school year that starts in July of next year. And just so you know that I'm not, the dartboard mentality back here, is we're looking at the 5 or 6/12 of 2020. So what are the expenditures running under budget? We're extrapolating that out, applying some inflationary factors, trying to get, well, our school buildings are open. And so right now I can tell you, I'm still not done with electricity. Some 4.3 million last year we spent, 4.2. I don't think that's going to be enough of a reduction for our electricity rate. So that's why I don't want you to focus on the bottom line of the forecast until we look at it Monday together, because it's going to take me the rest of the week just to work through all of this. And then back to that 2022 amount. So as I talk to my colleagues, most of which the Ohio 8 are virtual or some kind of virtual plus, a lot of them are returning their budget to 2019 levels. So if you look at the 2020 level there, back to 2019 to reasonableness, plus we negotiated some better electricity rates recently. So that's my line of thinking. I want to stop, and I've talked quite a lot there. Get your impact. So for all of the non-salary line items, so think about electricity, natural gas, water, contracted busing service. Think about Chromebook purchases. And does that assumption make sense to you, that we really spend a lot of time on 2021 extrapolating, how much potentially under budget we're going to be, and then 2022 returning back to fiscal 19 levels? What are your thoughts about that?
This is me trying to defer to my colleagues because I've done a lot of talking today thus far. So this is what that looks like. So if anybody else wants to jump in before I jump in, please jump in.
Somebody jump in. And while you guys are, thinking that through, I'm going to bring up another couple of examples just to show you really how complicated this is going to be. See pupil transportation. Hopefully that's on your screen. So, and we can break this down even further, but this is that power of the Forecast 5 software, where you see the drop and the precipitous drop between 2019 and 2021 in transportation. And then this, really highlights bringing this all back in fiscal 2022.
Just for my opinion, I mean, and I'm running into the same thing at my place of employment, and we just passed our budget for 2021. And we're on a calendar fiscal year, so it's slightly different than what we're looking at here at Akron Public Schools. But I think it's going to be one of those times where you're going to have to make the best judgment possible. We're going to have to adjust as we go, and we're going to have to be able to make mid-course corrections, because to your point, I think it makes sense. I mean, 2020 and 2021, in particular, because we're not on a calendar fiscal year, is going to be extremely difficult to forecast moving forward, especially 5 years out. And we've always known that 5 is a crystal ball anyway. Maybe the first 2 are reasonable, 3 is a stretch, and 4 and 5 are a shot in the dark, especially given biennium budgets and everything else that we're kind of throwing at us. And, maybe not knowing yet where the Fair School Funding Plan is going to fall. So I think where you're headed, which is, establishing the 2022 at the 2019 levels, makes sense, at least for now. But again, make mid-course corrections, maybe updating our 5-year forecast more frequently even than May and October at this point, probably would be more beneficial to us moving forward.
Yeah, I would concur with Mr. Bravo, Mr. Pendleton. I guess so. If you can go back to that, the electricity, gas, I just want to make sure, just from a housekeeping standpoint, that folks understand what they're looking at here. So each of these years, just to clarify, these are fiscal years, right?
Correct.
Right. So for example, and these are all, and by the way, none of these are actual numbers. This is all. So these were all what you had budgeted going back to 2018 for
2018, 2019, and 2020 are all actual.
Oh, actual. Okay, gotcha. Because,
obviously,
well, I'm glad you said it because I was going to ask you, why would you have budgeted less money in 2020? Right. Okay, gotcha. Okay. All right. So that makes sense. So 2021 moving forward. So those are all obviously going to be projections. Listen, I agree. I mean, the only thing I would add to what Mr. Bravo said was, in contrasting 2019 and 2022, so I think it makes sense to go back to 2019 conceptually. And this is going to sound like a trivial kind of maybe comment, but the cost of services is going to increase, from 2019 to 2022 as well, which I'm sure right. So as long as we're sort of taking that into account, that the cost of products and services, electricity, water, and gas, there are percent increases every year, that I'm sure So to me, as long as you're accounting for that, which I know you are, then I think it makes sense to go back and look at the 2019 numbers and just adjusting for inflation. Yeah,
I'll add an inflationary factor in there, and you'll notice, I just showed you a snippet of that. So on utilities, it's a little easier than purchase service, right? Because purchase service, if we get a copier contract, sometimes we save some money or we consolidated a building or what have you. But yes, we'll apply some inflationary trends on top of this kind of look back from 2022 to 2019.
I was curious too, for example, like in 2019, that's your actual, I am curious. And again, our budget is, in sum total, we're talking about $550 million, right? So $10,000 is basically, you could argue it's insignificant in the grand scheme. I am curious. So when you look at 2022, you have $10,000 less in water and sewage as compared to what our actual was in 2019. I was just curious as to how you got to that that number.
That's the nuances with the 5-year forecasting software that now what I'll have to do, here's how I will do that, Derek, Dr. Hall, is I'll take this, I'll do a snippet of this screen. Actually, it's a good question because this is what I'm doing line by line to make a more accurate forecast for Monday. And you can still see I've got a little bit of work to do. So what I'll do is come into here and start working through previous numbers, maybe add in prior to 2018, look at the inflationary or maybe a contract was rewritten, and then I'll start to extrapolate it out. And then once I get, as you and Mr. Bravo mentioned, once I get out 2-3 years, then I'll start to apply just a fixed percentage inflationary rate to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're hitting the, part of it's frustration, part of it's, the hunt of working and refining numbers also. But you're right. I mean, why is 2022 less than 2019? Yeah, as of right now, I don't have a good answer. So
yeah, well, and to that point too, I mean, we look at things like electricity, even, right, as well. I mean, like, part of what goes into there is any work that we're doing that's ongoing to improve the windows, the lights, as far as going to more higher efficiency types of items. Those are all things are going to factor in. So, and I get that this is a projection, and these are compared to the grand scheme of numbers, we're talking about 0.0000 percentages points here, right? I mean, so but yeah.
Not to push back on that though, but so if I'm a couple percent wrong here in utilities, or I'm a couple percent wrong on purchase service, I mean, this is why this isn't going to be the snapshot that it normally is in November, and then we'll pick it back up in May. This is going to have to be refined, have to be brought back to finance committee, and we're just going to have to push and pull on these things constantly. And it is by far the most unique budgeting and forecasting I've ever seen in my career. And so that's where, give other board members a chance to chime in here. But when we go back to this simple financial statement, we are still deficit spending, right? We're still borrowing into our reserve, and there's still going to be a financial need. The next major assumption, and this is where I said I didn't want to get out in front, but I have to ask these questions so that we prepare for the financial assumption, is whether or not the second half of the school year will be in person, whether or not we'll be blended, whether or not there's this remote plus, right? So that will have a major determining factor on what our financial situation will be. Just bringing back full transportation budget will add $5 million to the equation. Just that alone shows you the size and scope of this.
Yeah. No. I'm with you, Ryan. 100%. I mean, I think we all probably assumed 4 months ago that we'd all be back in school in person in January 2021.
Right.
Until you saw that we had 12,000 new cases of COVID yesterday. So there's no, and then, supposedly there's a vaccine on the horizon, so there's just, gosh, I mean, more power to anybody that's projecting anything with any kind of confidence level.
And so with that, maybe a couple questions. So let's leave it with some themes, and then I expect us to really question these kind of assumptions in public. And we say, hey, this is the forecast that we're submitting today. We might send in an amendment tomorrow, right? But the assumption has to be, or at least we list it up front, will we be virtual for the second half of the year? And at this point in time, I believe that I'm going to submit a forecast to you for approval that says that we are virtual, at least the majority of our offerings will be virtual for the remaining part of this school year. I believe that's a financially conservative approach, but I will say that that is the finance officer's assumption. You know,
well, you know, Ryan, actually, I would push back a bit on that. I would say the conservative approach would be to assume that we'd all be in school, you know, in person from January on. You know, again, maybe I'm defining conservative a little bit different, but assuming the higher expense as opposed to assuming the lower expense. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that's what I'm asking, because that assumption alone is tens of millions of dollars over the life of the forecast. That compounding effect, obviously.
I mean, yeah, I mean, and I'll defer to Ms. Autry and others who are on this call, but my preference would be, as far as what we're talking about in the public board meeting, you know, I think people are going to get the wrong idea if we walk in there saying, oh, well, you know, we're assuming that we're not going to be in school the rest of the year. People's heads will explode. You know, and so I would rather go in there and project confidence that, you know, that a vaccine is going to get approved in December and we're all magically going to have it in January and we'll all be back in school by the middle of January. Now, even though the odds of those things are fairly low, I'm just worried that if we go into the board meeting on Monday and we're not projecting, you know, because we've all got emails. You know I've gotten several where, you know, I've been accused of, oh, well, the only reason why you guys aren't going in person is because you're just trying to save money, which is not the truth at all. But if we walk in there Monday, Ryan, and we're like, hey, our assumption is that we're not going to be in school for the rest of the year, I think people's heads will explode. They will misinterpret that.
Yep. How about any other board members?
Ms. Autry, what do you?
Yeah, please. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, just on a little bit lighter note, you know, I like to assume with the new incoming administration that we're going to get an infusion of some type of relief somewhere. Where that might be, I'm not sure. I think with a new Secretary of Education, we're going to have, again, some type of relief. But I mean, it just seems like all along we have to maintain this flexibility. I mean,
that's right.
We just have to continue with that in mind, that everything moving forward is just dependent. You know, anyone who would expect such certainty in these times, I think is just, you know, that's not realistic.
You mentioned it. Go ahead.
Also thinking too about, you know, that summer slump, depending on where we're at. You know, are we going to incur some costs because of a need for some supports in the summertime to bring students back up to speed? So that's something else just to think about as well.
Now, Mrs. Autry, you're talking.
Yeah, I like that.
Yes. Dr. James and I have been talking about a whole summer semester, you know, that depending on how things go here, we may, if we're able to especially bring kids face to face, that we may need to have very robust programming in the summertime.
No, that's a great point. As well as Dr. point about the additional funding with the administration.
I will do a summary of the federal stimulus dollars and the federal stimulus pass-through from Summit County also on Monday, because that's made a major financial impact for us in being able to acquire additional technology, supplies and materials, PPE, but combined with our regular general fund, it's had a major financial impact. So here are my general themes. I'll leave it with you, and then please jump in with additional questions. The general themes for Monday is providing as much financial clarity as possible during these really uncertain times. 2, the impact of COVID-19, and really showing and stressing that this has right now, it's the 3-year impact just to our school district operations. So I think that seemed to resonate well with everybody. You know, fiscal 22 budgets back to 19 and really looking at how this is impacting. And then really does not, what I want to leave with, it does not change the long-term financial needs of a district in terms of new operating money levy. It could change timing, but it doesn't change the overall long-term need. We have been able to remove the majority of our deficit. And again, don't hold me to those numbers because it could show up a little bit negative or a little bit positive, but it's not going to be a $15 million deficit like we were predicting in May. And so talking a little bit about that. And then the final piece is Dr. James and I talked a little bit about adding this financial story to the state of the schools, kind of seed planning during a state of the schools, and then adding a more deep dive in February. So if you want to think about that, because we were heading into December 7th, and I don't think we would have the appropriate information to communicate effectively at that point in time. So that's where I am, but I don't want to shortchange you of more numbers. You know, I can get lost in those numbers, spreadsheets. But that's where I am with the overall presentation of it.
I'm good with that, Ryan. I don't have any lingering additional questions or concerns.
Okay.
For me.
I will have
I'll defer.
I'll have a PowerPoint
Yeah.
that walks us through and then if we want to take some deep dive numbers, you know, what are you budgeting for healthcare? What are you budgeting for, you know, salaries and wages out in future years? We can do that. We can do that on the fly.
You know what, Pat? You know what, Mr. Miller? You know that's something I do have a question about. Thanks for saying that. I mean, I am, you know, obviously naturally curious about the impact of COVID on our healthcare expenditures because I mean those are sizable dollars. So
Right.
I'd be interested to kind of see where we ended up at for fiscal year 2020. I'd be interested to see what was our final number for healthcare expenditures, and then I'd be interested to see where we're trending thus far in fiscal year 2021.
Okay.
Because I know we had some conversations around, you know, folks maybe were avoiding that, you know, going to the doctor and for primary care stuff and preventative health care,
Right.
you know, wellness visits as well because of COVID. So I'm just curious to see, did we see a rebound at all in some of the early months in fiscal year 2021 or I'm sorry, in the fall here or not? So I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Thank
add
you.
that. But I'll add that to the presentation. Will do.
Okay.
That is all
Audrey?
that I had for tonight. Is really theme driven and to plant the seeds that this is going to be an ongoing forecast. We're just going to have to continually revisit this. And then from the conversations we had last week in the evaluation, this is going to resonate in how we engage the board and community in our budgeting. So what is next, you know, right now is when we're starting on next year's school budget. And so that fiscal 2022, not just the forecast numbers, the actual building of the budget and the reflection of the district's priorities, like middle school, college, career academies, perfect, right? So we'll pull you into that process as well. Okay. That is all we had for tonight. Any other questions, comments?
I'm good here, Mr. Pendleton.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you actually tomorrow night. I thought we were going to see each other Monday. Nope, we're going to see you tomorrow. I will see you back here tomorrow night for a board meeting.
All right, same bad time, same bad channel.
Okay, good night.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.